Alright, this is Module 3, Homework 4 notes. We're going to add, subtract, and multiply radical expressions. So to start off, we're going to add 3x plus 2x. These are like terms, they are both x's. So if I have 3x's and I'm adding 2 more, we have 5x total. Same thing for the next one. If we are adding 3 square root of x plus 2 square root of x, again these are like terms, so total we have 5 square roots of x. The next example, adding 3 square root of x plus 2 cubed root of x. These are not like terms. We have the square root and we have the cubed root. They're not the same thing. So they are not like terms. So we will still just have 3 square roots of x plus 2 cubed roots of x. We cannot combine those together. For the next one, we have to add the square root of 27 plus the square root of 75. So as of right now, these are not like terms. They're not the same thing. But I can try to simplify them to make them like terms. So starting off with 27, we have 3 times 9. 3 is done, so it gets circled. 9 is 3 times 3. Again, my 3's get circled. So we broke it down as far as we could. So underneath the radical, we have 3 times 3 times 3. It's the square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So these two 3's are coming out of the radical as just 3, and that one 3 is staying underneath. So we simplified the square root of 27 into 3 square roots of 3. Same thing for 75. So we can break down 75 into 5 times 15. 5 cannot be broken down any further, so it gets circled. 15 is 5 times 3. Again, they cannot be broken down any further, so they get circled. We broke down 75. So plus the square root of 5 times 5 times 3. It is a square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So these two 5's are coming out of the radical as 5, and that 3 is staying underneath the radical. So now we have 3 square roots of 3 plus 5 square roots of 3. So now these are like terms, so total we have 8 square roots of 3. Just like up here, the x's stayed the same. This 3 is going to stay the same. We just have 8 of them now. Same thing for the next time. For the next one, this time we're going to subtract the square root of 50 minus the square root of 98. So breaking down 50, any way you want to do it. Let's do 5 times 10. 5's done, so it gets circled. 10 is 5 times 2. So we broke down the square root of 50 into 5 times 5 times 2. It is the square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. These two 5's are coming out of the radical. And that 2 is staying underneath the radical because there's not another one to come out with it. Breaking down 98. Any way you want to break it down. So we can say 2 times 49. 2 is done, so it gets circled. 49 is 7 times 7. So minus, we broke down 98 into 7 times 7 times 2. Because 7 times 7 times 2 is 98. It is the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So these two 7's are coming out of the radical as 7, and that 2 is staying underneath. So now I have 5 square roots of 2 minus 7 square roots of 2. So now these are like terms. 5 minus 7 will give us negative 2 square roots of 2. Next one, we have to add 4 square root of 3 x cubed plus 9x square root of 27x. So as of right now, these are not like terms. They're not the same thing, but we can try to simplify them to make them like terms. So that 4's out front. Breaking down, we have 3x cubed, so 3 times x times x times x. It is the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So these two x's are coming outside of the radical. Notice this 4 is already out front, So don't forget to leave it out front. These x's, this 1x is coming out. Underneath the radical, 3x. So that simplified into 4x square root of 3x. Plus, same thing, 9x is out front. We have to break down the square root of 27x. Breaking down 27, 3 times 9. 3 is done, 9 is 3 times 3. So that 9x is staying out front. Underneath the radical, we have 3 times 3 times 3 times x. It is the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So these two 3's are coming out front. So again, don't forget to bring down this 9x times this 3 is coming out front, and underneath the radical, that 3 is going to stay and that x is going to stay. So this becomes 9 times 3, which is 27x square root of 3x. So now we have 4x square root of 3x plus 27x square root of 3x. So now these are like terms because they are both x square root of 3x. So if we have 4 plus 27, 4 things plus 27 things will give us 31 things, so 31x square root of 3x. Final answer for that one. Next page. Same concept, now we're just doing 3 terms. So if we have to add or subtract 5 square root of 48 minus 2 square root of 32 plus a square root of 27. As of right now, none of these are like terms, but we can simplify each of them separately to hopefully make them like terms. So breaking down 48, we have 2 times 24. 2 is done, so we get circled. 24 is 2 times 12. 12 is 2 times 6. 6 is 2 times 3. So remember that 5 is staying out front. Underneath the radical, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 2's and a 3. Excuse me. It's the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So these 2 2's are coming out, and these 2 2's are coming out. So outside of the radical, this 5 is going to stay. The 2 2's are coming out. The 2 sets of 2's are coming out, and that 3 is staying underneath the radical. So we're left with 5 times 2, which is 20, square root of 3. Same thing for 32. We're going to break that down. So 2 times 16. 16 is 2 times 8. 8 is 2 times 4. 4 is 2 times 2. So we have minus. Don't forget to bring down this 2. Underneath the radical, it's already out front, so leave it out front. Underneath the radical, we have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It is the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So these 2 2's are coming out, and those 2 2's are coming out. This negative 2 is already out front, so leave it out front. That set's coming out, that set's coming out, and 1 2 is left underneath the radical. So we have negative 2 times 2 times 2, which will give us negative 8 square root of 2. Last one, breaking down the square root of 27. We have 3 times 9. 3 is done, so it gets circled. 9 is 3 times 3. So plus the square root, we broke down 27 into 3 times 3 times 3. It is the square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So those 2 3's are coming out front. And that 1 3 is staying underneath the radical. So we have plus 3 square root of 3. So now combining like terms, we have 20 square roots of 3 plus 3 square roots of 3. Those two are like terms, so that'll give us 23 square root of 3 minus 8 square root of 2. These two are not like terms. I have the square root of 3 and the square root of 2. They're not the same thing, so I cannot simplify any further. That's our final answer. Next one. Same concept, adding and subtracting. A squared, square root of 16a beats the 7th, minus the square root of 36, a to the 5th beats the 7th, plus 25, a to the 5th beats the 7th. So as of right now, these are all different things underneath the radical, so they are not like terms. So we are going to simplify them and then hopefully combine like terms from there. So 16, we can say 2 times 8. 8 is 2 times 4. 4 is 2 times 2. Just like the previous problem, this a squared is out front. It's going to stay out front. Underneath the radical, we have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's the square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. I'm sorry, I forgot about these a's and b's over here. So 1a and 7 b's. So it's a square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So these two 2's are coming out. I'll write this in a different color. These two 2's are coming out. There's only one a, so it's not enough to make a group, so it'll stay underneath. Those 2 b's, those 2 b's, and those 2 b's are coming out. So this a squared is out front. It's going to stay out front. We have 2 groups of 2 coming out and 3 groups of b coming out. Underneath the radical, we are left with 1a and 1b. So this becomes 2 times 2, which is 4. A squared, b times b is b to the 3rd power square root of ab. That was just the first one. Now doing the second one. I have 36. So, a couple different options. You can break it down like we did here. Or I already know the square root of 36 is 6 times 6. That will give me that 2 of a kind that I'm looking for. So I don't need to break it down any further. So minus the square root of 6 times 6, 5 a's, and 7 b's. So minus, like we said, we're looking for 2 of a kind. There's already 2 6's, so those can come out of the radical. These 2 a's, these 2 a's, these 2 b's, these 2 b's, these 2 b's. So we have minus 6, a, b, b, b. Underneath the radical, we have 1a and 1b. So this can be simplified to minus 6. I have 2 a's out front, so a squared. We have 3 b's, so that's b cubed, square root of ab. Lastly, we have 25, which we can break down into 5 times 5. 5 a's and 7 b's. To save room, I'm just going to do this one up here. So I have 5 times 5, 5 a's and 7 b's. So plus this stuff. So it's a square root, we're looking for 2 of a kind. So these 2 5's are coming out, these 2 a's, these 2 a's, these 2 b's, these 2 b's, and these 2 b's. So outside the radical we have 5. Outside of the radical we have 5 times a times a times b times b times b. Underneath the radical we have 1a and 1b. So again, plus this step right here, which we could say plus 5, 2a, so a squared, 3b, so b cubed, square root of ab. So now that we have them all completely simplified, we have 4a squared b cubed minus 6a squared b cubed, 4a squared b cubed square root of ab minus 6a squared b cubed square root of ab plus 5a squared b cubed square root of ab. So if you notice, they are all a squared b cubed square root of ab. So that means they are all like terms. So if we have 4 of these things, minus 6 plus 5, that will leave us with 3a squared b cubed square root of ab as our final answer. 4 minus 6 is negative 2, plus 5 will give us that 3. And the a squared b cubed square root of ab stays the same. Next page. So we have to add the square root of 125 over x to the 8th plus the square root of 5 over 16x to the 8th. So as of right now, these are not like terms. So let's simplify each one separately to make them like terms. So starting off with the square root of 125 over x to the 8th, we can use the quotient rule to split this up and say the square root of 125 divided by the square root of x to the 8th. So a little side note. We can simplify the square root of 125, which we know is 5 times 25. And 25 is 5 times 5. So underneath the square root, we really have 5 times 5 times 5. It is the square root, so we're taking out 2 of a kind. So those 2 5s are coming out front, and the 1 5 is left underneath the radical. And then we also have the square root. So that's this first part. We also have the square root of x to the 8th. We talked about either we can write out 8x's, or we know we're taking 8x's and we're taking out groups of 2. So we can say x to the 8th divided by 2. That will give us x to the 4th coming out of the radical. So we know this simplified, the square root of 125 simplified to 5 square roots of 5 over x to the 8th. The square root of x to the 8th simplified to x to the 4th. Plus, now dealing with the second fraction. Same thing, we can use the quotient rule to split it up and say the square root of 5 divided by the square root of 16x to the 8th. The square root of 5 cannot be simplified. Can't break down 5. But we can simplify the square root of 16x to the 8th. So breaking down 16, we know it's 2 times 8. 8 is 2 times 4. 4 is 2 times 2. So underneath the square root, we really have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times x to the 8th. It's a square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So these 2 2's are coming out. These 2 2's are coming out. And just like last time, we said we can, if we have 8 x's and we're taking out groups of 2, we can take that 8 divided by 2. So that'll leave us with 2 times 2, which is 4x to the 4th power. 8 divided by 2 will give us that 4th power. So we simplified the second fraction into plus the square root of 5 over 4x to the 4th. So now we have to add these two fractions. These are not like terms because they do not have the same denominator. So that means we have to get an LCD, a least common denominator, to add these two fractions. So our LCD, or least common denominator, needs to be 4x to the 4th. The second fraction already is 4x to the 4th in the denominator, so it's good to go. The first fraction has x to the 4th, but it's missing that 4. So to include it, we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 4. This will leave us with 4 times 5, which is 20, square root of 5 over 4x to the fourth, plus 1 square root of 5 over 4x to the fourth. So now these are like terms, we can combine them into the same fraction, all over 4x to the fourth. So we have 20 square root of 5 plus the square root of 5. So 20 of these things plus 1 of these things. These are like terms. So together, if you need to write a little 1 here to remind you there's one of them, that will give us 21 square root of 5 all over 4x to the fourth. From here, we need to make sure that it cannot be simplified any further. 21 and 4 are our only like terms. Those cannot be simplified. So that's our final answer. Next problem. Simplifying the square root of 11z times the square root of 11 minus the square root of z. So just like any other problem, we are going to distribute and say the square root of 11z times the square root of 11. I'm just going to rewrite it out so that way we don't miss any steps. And then we have the square root of 11z times negative square root of z. So minus the square root of 11z times the square root of z. So looking at each of these, we are multiplying, they're both square roots. So that means we can write it underneath the same square root. So I have the square root of 11 times z times 11. Same thing for this one, they are both square roots. So we can write it underneath the same square root. So 11 can't be broken up any further, and z can't be broken up any further. So they are completely simplified. Now it's a square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. There's 2 11s. So those are coming out of the radical. And that z is staying underneath the radical. Minus the square root of z times z. So these 2 z's are coming out of the radical. And the 11 staying underneath the radical. So now I have 11 square roots of z minus z square roots of 11. These are not like terms, they're not the same thing. One is the square root of z, one is the square root of 11. So I can't combine anything, so that's our final answer. Next, I have the square root of 3 minus the square root of 10 squared. So that means I need to write this out twice. So I have the square root of 3 minus the square root of 10 times the square root of 3 minus the square root of 10. Just like the previous problem, we are going to distribute. So you have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. And then we have the square root of 3 times negative square root of 10. So minus the square root of 3 times the square root of 10. Now we're going to distribute this negative 10, square root of 10 to both terms. So negative square root of 10 times the square root of 3. So negative square root of 10 times the square root of 3. And lastly, negative square root of 10 times negative square root of 10 will give us positive square root of 10 times the square root of 10. So looking at each one, they are all square roots. So that means we can write them underneath each pair underneath the same square root. So the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. You can write underneath the same square root minus the square root of 3 times 10 minus the square root of 10 times 3 plus the square root of 10 times 10. It's the square root we're looking for, 2 of a kind. So these 2 3's are coming out of the radical. Nothing's left underneath that radical, so that radical is going to go away. The second one, I have 3, which is completely broken down, but I can break down 10 into 2 times 5. But underneath the radical, I have a 3, I have a 2, and I have a 5. So none of these are like terms. There's not 2 of a kind, so I can't simplify it. So it'll just leave me with negative square root of 3 times 10, which is 30. Minus, same thing here, no 2 of a kinds, so it'll be minus the square root of 30. Plus, I have 2 10s underneath the radical. is the square root, so we're going to take out those 2 of a kinds, and we are left with 10. There's nothing left underneath that radical, so that radical will go away. So lastly, we can combine like terms, and we have 3 plus 10, which will give us 13. I have negative square root of 30 minus the square root of 30. So if you want to think about it as negative 1 thing minus 1 thing, so negative 1 minus 1 will give us negative 2 square roots of 30. These are not like terms, so we cannot go any further. That's our final answer. Next page. Simplifying 3 square root of 3 plus 7 square root of 2 times the square root of 3 minus 7 square root of 2. So just like last time, we are going to distribute 3 square root of 3 times the square root of 3. Three square root of 3 times negative 7 square root of 2. So 3 times negative 7 is negative 14. Square root of 3, not square root of 14. 3 times negative 7 is negative 21. Square root of 3 times the square root of 2. Now distributing 7 square root of 2 times the square root of 3. So plus 7 square root of 2 times the square root of 3. And lastly, negative square root of 2 times positive square root of 2 will give us negative 7 times 7 is 49. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2. So just like the previous problem, we have that 3 is going to stay out front. Square root of 3 times the square root of 3. So underneath the radical, we have 3 times 3. Minus 21, square root of 3 times the square root of 2. They're both square roots, so I can write them underneath the same square root. Plus 7, square root of 2 times 3, minus 49, square root of 2 times 2. So simplifying, this 3 is out front, it's going to stay out front. It is a square root, so we're looking for 2 of a kind. So those 2 3's are coming out of the radical. Nothing's left underneath the radical, so the radical is going to go away there. We're left with 3 times 3, which is 9. Bringing down this minus 21. I have the square root of 3 times 2. There's no 2 of a kind, so it cannot be simplified. So we're left with minus 21 square roots of 3 times 2, which is 6. Plus 7, same thing, square root of 6. Minus, bringing down our 49. Underneath the square root, we have 2 times 2, so that's 2 of a kind. That can come out of the radical, which will give us negative 98. So I have 9, bringing this down, minus 21 square root of 6, plus 7 square root of 6, minus 98. So lastly, combining like terms, we have 9 minus 98, which will give us negative 89. And we have negative 21 square roots of 6 plus 7 square roots of 6, which will give us negative 14 square roots of 6. These are not like terms, so we cannot go any further. Next, we're wanting to simplify the square root of z minus k times the square root of z plus k. Again, distributing square root of z times the square root of z. Square root of z times positive k. So plus k square root of z. Now distributing the negative k. So negative k times the square root of z minus k square root of z. And lastly, we have negative k times positive k, which will give us negative k squared. So square root of z times the square root of z. They are both square roots, so I can write it underneath the same square root. It's a square root, so we're looking for two of a kind. So these two z's are coming out of the radical. Nothing's left underneath the radical, so the radical is going to go away. I have positive k square root of z minus k square root of z. So if you notice, I have plus and minus, so those cancel each other out. And then I have minus k squared. So we're left over with z minus k squared. This cannot be simplified because they're not like terms. Final answer. Last one. To simplify, the square root of 6x minus 2 square root of 7x times the square root of 6x minus 3 square root of 7x. So we are going to distribute square root of 6x times the square root of 6x square root of 6x times negative 3 square root of 7x. So negative 3 square root of 6x times square root of 7x. Then we have negative 2 square root of 7x times the square root of 6x. So negative 2 square root of 7x times square root of 6x. And lastly, negative 2 square root of 7x times negative 3 square root of 7x. So you have negative 2 times negative 3, which is positive 6, square root of 7x times square root of 7x. So simplifying, these are both square roots. We can write it underneath the same square root. It's a square root, so we're looking for two of a kind. So these two 6's can come out of the radical. And the two x's can come out of the radical. Nothing's left underneath the radical, so the radical is going to go away. Bringing down this minus 3. They are both square roots. We can write it underneath the same square root. 6 times x times 7 times x. So still bringing down this negative 3. We're looking for two of a kind because it's a square root. So these two x's can come out of the radical. Underneath the radical we have 6, which is 2 times 3, times 7, which cannot be broken down. So there's not two of a kind. So underneath the radical, we have 6 times 7, which is 42. Bringing down this next one, so minus 2 square root of 7 times x times 6 times x. Bringing it down again, this minus 2. It's a square root, so we're looking for two of a kind. So these two x's are coming out of the radical. Just like we talked about on this problem. Underneath the radical, we have 7 times 6, which has no two of a kinds in common. So they're saying underneath the radical, which is 42. Lastly, bringing down this plus 6, underneath the square root, we have 7 times x times 7 times x. This 6 is out front. It's going to stay out front. It's a square root, so we're looking for two of a kind. So these two 7's can come out of the radical, and the two x's can come out of the radical. Times 7's coming out and x is coming out. So this can simplify down to plus 42x. So just bringing everything on the same line. We have 6x minus 3x square root of 42 minus 2x square root of 42 plus 42x. So now that everything's simplified, we can combine like terms. So we have 6x minus 42x, 6x plus 42x, which is 48x. And then we have negative 3x square root of 42 minus 2x square root of 42, which will give us negative 5x square root of 42. These two are not like terms, so we cannot combine it any further. We're done. So that was Module 3, Homework 4 notes.